I had read a lot about dimethyltryptamine, and even wrote a report about it for a pharmacology course I was taking in university. Wanting to get my hands on some regular DMT, and stupidly not knowing the difference between 5-MeO and DMT, I nearly shit myself when my friend told me he had got his hands on some. I immediately wanted to try it, as did several other friends. Being obsessive-compulsive, previously treated for OCD, but currently off medication, I was still rather iffy about the substance, and so I decided to go last, and gauge my friend's reactions to a 5 mg dose. My first friend, D, took 10 mg in a single hit, almost finishing it all, and was super effed before the smoke was out of his mouth. D's wife, J, hit the pipe immediately after, taking around 5 mg and barely getting anything. Q and I sat on the couch opposite them and just kind of gauged how they took it, extremely well. D had a shit-eating grin on his face for roughly 10 minutes, making strange noises every once in a while, and seeming rather shocked, while J had taken off outside to look at trees. Both seemed extremely euphoric and just in love with the world. After seeing this, Q and I decided we would give it a go, so our supplier/sitter loaded up 5 mg for Q, who took it and immediately sank into his chair. Next up was me. Assuming I was taking 5 mg, I lifted the bowl to my mouth and the nervousness of the upcoming trip was making me extremely anxious. I had sweaty hands, a racing heart, and bad mindset. The feelings of anxiety made the come up extremely unpleasant. Another thing is I had never done psychedelics. No zoomies, no LSD, no peyote, nothing. I was an avid cannabis enthusiast, and had dabbled in my fair share of OTC/hospital analgesics. Anyways, with the pipe up to my mouth, I lit the bowl and began to inhale. I took a bigger hit of 5-MeO DMT than anything I had ever taken in my life, a good around 20 seconds deep inhale. As I let the smoke out of my mouth, I asked, "I'm doing 5 mg right?" And our supplier responded, "No dude, I loaded you 10 mg, and holy fuck that was a big hit." Before I could let the smoke out it felt like I was hit by a train, and I began to panic. I wanted to back out, but I was past the point of no return. All the color seemed to fade out of the room, and only mundane, oblique, grayscale colors remained. J, now sober, had returned from outside and passed in front of me, heading into my kitchen. I remember seeing her in 3 places at once, each with a large tracer/vapor trail behind her, forming a path into the kitchen. I felt like I could see in 4 dimensions, kind of like the worm tunneling in Donnie Darko. At the same time, my body was experiencing a huge rush, kind of like the first time you ride on a shoddy aircraft and they max the throttle for takeoff, what I imagine astronauts experience when entering space. With that rush came the feeling of nausea. My stomach had jumped into my throat and my heart, already beating extremely fast, began to beat even faster. At this point in time, my upstairs neighbor thought it would be a good idea to play downward scales on her clarinet upstairs. The sound of her clarinet, in retrospect they are recognizable as clarinet sounds, sounded like what Transformers sound like when turning into Autobots in the blockbuster movies, a sort of dubsteppy, choppy, high-pitched reverberating bass. Then, being sat in front of an open window, I heard cars driving through the street outside. I could hear every stone crunch under their tires, and I started to feel a bit overwhelmed. Then I closed my eyes and just saw a black. I felt like I was blacking out. I've blacked out a ton of times, and I don't mean drinking-wise. The nausea built up, as did my body temperature, and I felt really sweaty and panicked as I thought I had overdosed and was dying. Then my body dissolved, freaking the shit out of me. A slight tingling in my extremities upon inhale had built up to become almost intolerable. I could compare the feeling to that of having a limb go completely numb, and I mean completely, as if it won't even move by conscious will, and then reawaken with the needles. But multiply the needles by 1,000 times. It felt as though my arms and legs were fusing with the air around me. I remember thinking to myself, this is just a trip. The 5-MeO is just binding 5-HT receptors in your brain and effing you up a bit. You're okay. Just focus on your breathing. So I focused on my breathing, which had become rather difficult. In retrospect, it was probably due to the time dilation. Soon I felt much better, and when I closed my eyes, all I could see were daisies and mountainous landscape. I opened my eyes to realize that I too, like D earlier, just had a shit-eating grin on my face, but I was super sweaty. I couldn't move my arms, nor could I open my mouth. The inside of my teeth felt wonderful, as did the aftertaste of the 5-MeO DMT. Then without me even thinking to say it, my mouth opened and out came "My mouth feels funny." Everyone in the room laughed, and I had the most euphoric body high. Kind of like if you've ever stayed up for around 72 hours, then right on the verge of unconsciousness, you smoke a fat joint, and you trick your body into feeling wonderful to move, again, multiplied by 1,000 times, that's what I felt. I then remembered how to move my arms, and I wiped the sweat from my forehead, and began to walk around the room. Approximately 12 minutes had passed since inhale, and I was extremely pale, and still a little nauseated, but I couldn't stop smiling. Color had returned to the room, but everything had a slight yellow tinge to it. I also still had tracers. Within a few minutes I was still experiencing a body high, but largely dumbed down. My supplier had returned to the room, and said, "Oh, you're back. How was the trip?" I had completely forgotten I had smoked twice what I was anticipating. In reality, my supplier told me I smoked around 13 milligrams, plus around 1/3 of Q's hit, which he did not finish, plus all the resin built up from the 15 milligrams D&J had smoked 20 minutes earlier, making my dose around 20 milligrams. The days following, I experienced severe delirium, and loss of sense. Looking back, I believe it was an enjoyable experience, although at a lower dose would have been more enjoyable. Have since tried a lower dose and enjoyed it more. For anyone trying it, I would recommend 10 milligrams tops. Don't hold on to any feelings of panic/despair when entering the trip. Just focus on your breathing and remember it will be over in like 10 minutes. The feeling of my body dissolving was extremely uncomfortable, but it seemed as if my ego was holding me back from the trip. Thought, it's the ego that's dissolving, so let it go. It feels so much better after. Don't expect anything. It's different for everyone. But don't try and take control. Just let go as you are totally helpless to what's happening. The 5 Mayu is taking you on a ride through its stomping grounds, so just let go. Be sure to wait out your dose on an analytical balance. I have since realized, the reason for my severe nausea/sweating/heart rate/delirium following the trip was probably due to serotonin toxicity due to 5-MeU's non-specificity when binding to 5-HT receptors, unlike DMT which has preferential targets, so be careful and definitely weigh it out to 0.1 mg so you know the precise amount you are taking. Eyeballing can be extremely dangerous. But anyways, that was my trip. Thanks for reading.